welcome to another episode of The Four. Here with me again today are Devin, Ty, and David, and I'm Heather. We have an exciting episode today. I'm going to start with kind of a low-hanging fruit question.
It's going to get spicy,
people. It's going to get spicy at the end. But the first one is fashion changes throughout the years. If we were to look at uniforms at prep schools in the 1970s, we might be appalled to find collars extended well beyond the Fibonacci sequence.
That's right.
So
it's
styles change. What about hoodies? What about modern? What about male and female differences now? What do we do with school uniforms? Devin, what do you think? Fibonacci collars should come back?
No, I think the 70s were bad for fashion. I'm glad we've moved on. I don't want bell bottoms or long collars. I do think there is a form that we have to have and a standard we have to uphold. It's interesting that these changes creep in because it's just part of the broader culture, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the question of taste always matters. So there could be a good reason for like allowing students to wear hoodies, but it should have some larger kind of significance. I think, Ty, you brought up like a lot of schools tend to have like a day where they're wearing their logo, their school sweatshirts that have some spirit or something like that, or it's part of the house.
A lot of schools get into this kind of trouble where they're selling logo wear for their sports teams. And then the obvious question in the community is, well, can I wear this item of clothing purchased from the school in the classroom?
Yeah.
And so this question is yay or nay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and as we always have to ask, what's the telos of a uniform?
Yeah.
What are we trying to achieve with a uniform? Right. And so I've heard a lot of different ones. I've heard that, this way we can normalize everything so nobody's rich and nobody's poor. I think it's an egalitarian reason. It's a really bad reason. I think the better reason, and really the only one that holds water, is that anybody who's spent any time around kids knows that they're very poor judges of style to begin with, and what appears nice or fun. I had these conversations with my kids, one of them in particular, about the way he wore his hair. It was always a point of how can I be a little bit different? And in a community, that can be disruptive when kids are doing it. Now, when adults do it, it can also be disruptive, but I think generally adults are more mature. So uniforms, really, their purpose is to unite the community. Mm-hmm. It's to make everyone, but there is a second purpose, which is that all transcendentals matter, and beauty is one of the transcendentals. Mm-hmm. So wearing something beautiful and appropriate to the task at hand is important. A lot of schools like to have T-shirts and jeans. A lot of times T-shirts and shorts or slacks. A lot of times they do that because they think that's more affordable for families. In reality, when you're only dealing with 2 or 3 uniforms, it's not a lot of money to buy a nicer uniform, and they're built to last. So in effect, I think a higher purpose needs to be evidenced by what the uniform looks like.
The uniform always communicates something. Anything we wear, there is some rhetoric to it. It's always conveying what we mean, right? Mm-hmm. If we get pulled over by a police officer and he steps out of his cruiser and he's wearing pajamas, we would be like, what is happening?
Right,
we'd probably punch on the gas and get out of there. So, uniforms matter. They communicate what we're about. There is an ethos and esprit de corps that is achieved in a uniting that's achieved in a uniform. I think it's true that taste is probably lacking in a lot of young people. But Ty, I was gonna throw this at you. I don't know if you've seen. Have you heard of?
I have.
You have great taste. Look at that. No.
You spent 10 years in the UK.
That's right. There's a school in London called Christ Hospital. I think it was founded in the 16th century, and it was largely for students who were less fortunate. They have seemingly ridiculous uniforms. It's a blue coat with yellow socks. It's very, very famous. It's like this, and it hasn't changed. And it's now become this kind of badge of honor where the students that are attending at that school, they love it. But it looks like something out of Harry Potter, right? It's like this long wool coat with bright orange and yellow socks, and that's just what they do. And it's like, there is a way, I think, maybe it takes like 400 years, but there is a way for the uniform to become something meaningful.
Absolutely. And I mean, my experience in the UK is that almost every school has a uniform. I can't,
Yes, that's
I
right.
have zero experiences at schools in the UK that didn't have a uniform. So 100% of my knowledge is they all have uniforms. They are different uniforms. The things a uniform brings, unity in the community, but also distinction with other communities. And so the fact that one school's uniform is very different from another, you can imagine a group that's traveling in a school, you're easily able to see
There's a esprit
who
de
is
corps behind
part of
it.
our group.
Yeah.
Oh, we're at a museum. Don't go wandering off, student. Do I have enough?
There's, yep.
There's a
You know,
practical-
we're getting back a little bit to the question of why are hoodies coming in. I think the reason hoodies is here is often the request is to wear a hoodie over my
your
uniform.
There you
Yep.
go.
And so maybe Christ College has overcome this, but one reason that high school students want to wear a hoodie is because they don't think their uniform looks good.
Right.
And that can be
Covered
a real problem.
Yeah.
So I think a school needs to be willing to have a little bit of dialogue to say, is this actually a uniform that looks a bit silly, and is there a way to make it look sharp?
Yeah.
Another reason often is that people feel cold in the
true.
uniform.
Yeah.
And so then one thing the school I worked at and David worked at did was introduce blazers. And the blazers solve both problems. They look very sharp and they're warm. And then there's really no excuse for the hoodie, but also much less reason, much less impetus to wear it.
Don't you think it's, and we want the uniform to be fitting to what's happening. And a hoodie is not really fitting to the academic environment. It might be fitting on a
agree.
Friday game
agree.
day, or it might be
Yes.
fitting on a.
Yes,
I
there
think we
should be
want-
exceptions.
And I think that gets into everything with the uniform. We want it fitting. I know some schools don't have a shoe policy, and I get it. But I remember seeing girls in khaki skirts with leopard print stilettos. I was like, I don't think that quite works. Like, it's just not quite fitting to the uniform. And I think that can happen. Or one school wanted girls only in skirts, but even on the casual day, they had to wear their T-shirt with skirts, so they looked like prairie muffins. It's like, that's just silly. I think we want fitting outfits, fitting things. Things should go together. That's why the pink sequins bow in and of itself could be adorable on a cute little 5-year-old Susie. But it doesn't go with the plaid blue, navy, and green skirt. Like, there's a fittingness to it.
So I was responsible for developing the uniform code at Ambrose back in the day, and it was an interesting experience for me because I was like, okay, every uniform I pick and run by the kids, because we were starting the high school and we wanted to change it because the lower school uniforms, the jumpers weren't really cutting it and all this, and so everything I showed to the high school girls, they were like, ew, yuck. And so I couldn't figure out if it was because, I pick on the high school girls because the guys, they don't care. But the girls, the certain pleats make them look fat. And I got to be such an expert on pleats. I shocked the uniform suppliers. And I know a box pleat with a 2.5 inch. But I sat in my office one day and I thought back and I thought, my prior career, I did focus groups in Europe, which was an interesting task because I didn't start work until around 6 or 7 o'clock at night in Europe. And so that meant all day long I had nothing to do. So I would go to museums, and that's where the grammar school kids were, and they all wore uniforms, and their uniforms were brilliant.
Yep.
Yes,
They were
they look
beautiful
great.
uniforms. And whether I was in France or Germany or Spain, they're all beautiful uniforms. You come to the United States, it's like, no wonder kids hate these things. And I don't know, a friend of mine, I asked the guy at the local uniform school or uniform supplier why this was the case. And I don't want to pick on the Catholics here, but basically what he said was that the only uniform schools in the United States are Catholic schools, and they haven't paid attention for years on what the beauty or the styles or anything were like. So all we have is supply, and you think about it, uniform supply is really an issue, are these. And so I went, okay, so I've got a source from Europe or something. Well, long story short, I found a place called Flynn and O'Hare back east in New Jersey. They supply uniforms to the girls and boys prep schools along the Northeast coast. They're the biggest uniform supplier in the U.S., but it turns out they can do anything. They can make you
that's
whatever
good
you
to know.
want, and they can, make it look good. So we still use them at Ambrose because One of the other problems we had at Ambrose was that I didn't like the fact that the dark blue polo and khakis were unisex. Girls had a girl's cut of them, but they basically looked like girl versions of the boys. And there was no real distinction between the two. But you're never the popular headmaster if you take the pants away from the girls.
Right.
So I figured I just had to make a uniform that looked so good that the girls wouldn't want to wear the khakis. And surprise, surprise, with Flynn and O'Hara's help, we found this uniform that was from a girls' school in upstate New York. And within 3 years, there wasn't a girl in the building in khakis. Not because there was a rule, but because the uniform looked good. They wanted to wear the uniform. Now, I'd asked them about it because I razzed a few of them who say, you said you wanted pants, and now you're wearing the skirts. It has pockets.
Interesting.
That's what they said.
Well, I love that heart though of like we do want the kids to want it. Not all of them are going to. They're going to push back against some of it, but like we want it to not be something that's a pain to wear. I've seen people choose uniforms at high school girls. I'm like, would you wear that? I wouldn't wear it. Why are you having them wear little girl clothes?
Yeah.
That's
Jumpers have to be done by the fifth grade.
Right. Thinking through that, and we're not trying to put this arbitrary standard on the kids. We're trying to create a standard they love to keep, and the ones that don't, there's a discipline for it. But that's
and there's always going to be a resistance to the uniform.
Yep.
Carl Truman talks about this growing up, and he talks about this in light of his book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self and Self-Expression, how that's like a feature in our society. And he says, one of the great things about my school was that it crushed my individuality. just rounded down.
Good attempt at the accent. You got it.
our individuality is not always that great. But let's move on to the next one. So we're going to get into kind of the section that's a little bit more loaded, and we're going to really talk about a little bit of differences between boys and girls. But I'm going to start with this. First of all, boys. What are little boys made of? And this is the most important question. How much combat is too much combat out on the field? And I'm going to throw this out there, snowball fights. What would you say about snowball fights?
No rocks in
For all our schools in Florida, please don't go anywhere. We'll find football games are next.
That's a great, so that right there, like the risk of like a rock ending up in a snowball, that's just enough for so many heads of schools or
No
say, no,
snowball fights.
can't do it, can't risk, liability, too crazy, don't want to go near it, which is a problem. I think you see that our young people, our young boys especially, are getting more and more coddled, honestly, and softer.
So true.
This is a problem.
There's a way to really teach the male and female within the school, even in a snowball fight. I have 15 grandchildren. I just got to be with all of them the last few days, and we have mainly all boys. And the few girls, I'd be like, you guys can sword fight, but you have to make sure none of your girl cousins are around that are going to get hurt. And we had this, they were shooting Nerf guns. Oh, one of your girl cousins is walking by. Pause. Wait for her to get by. Now you can start shooting again. I think it matters how we address this. It's a great opportunity for them.
Well, and this is really built in to boys, right? I heard the other day that boys as young as 1 year old prefer toys with weapons, figures with weapons to figures without, right? And this is already like no animal uses weapons, right? So it's a very distinctly human.
1 year old.
That's right. That's right. There was this. I remember a speaker at a conference, like one of the only ones that I had heard years ago talk about this, and he said there was a mom that came to him and said she was distraught because she had taken away all the guns. She had taken away all the things that would look like guns in the house. And she said, I don't know what to do. The other day, my, firstborn chewed his grilled cheese into a gun and shot his younger brother.
And we've all heard those. I think the question comes back to what you're talking about, safety versus combat sports. I know tackle football was a thing. One of the things I've been hypothesizing is that the reason why extreme, stupid, crazy sports are now popular, like jumping mountain bikes off the tops of mountains, flying out of airplanes with young men, is because they never got a hard lesson when they were young. Because we so overprotected them, they didn't actually get hit with a snowball that was made of ice. They didn't fall off of a swing that was high in the air and break their arm. And so now they don't realize just how fragile the human body is.
Right.
Well, this is the argument that Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff make in The Coddling of the American Mind. They say that children of all genders, boys and girls, are built to engage in fearful activity to the point that they can individually handle it and then drop back and maybe seek comfort, but then go back to that limit of fear. And that grows their capacity to engage with the world and things that they don't understand or are threatening to them. They need dangerous play at their level. So jungle gyms and slides, tall slides, they could fall off. Those kinds of things are necessary for children to develop.
Well, and it's hard because one of the blessings is we value life very much. And praise the Lord that we value life. But if we value life at the expense of life, right, that's the danger, right? And what I mean by that is valuing life so much that we don't let anybody live.
Yeah.
And that's, I think the boys sword fighting, they learn. I love what, they learn by experience what it feels like to be, wonked across the head with a sword, or it's like, it's okay. And I think one of the things you can do is that's a training moment. Say, throwing one with a rock just makes it not fun anymore. Like it stops.
Yeah, I mean,
you can train in those moments.
I heard of a school that had a bucket full of safety glasses that they put out on snow days for that purpose. I didn't know how I felt about that. On one hand, I'm glad they were snowball fighting. On the other hand, it's like maybe they need to learn not to throw at people's heads. And of course, that takes coaching out on the field to really govern and train them.
It's funny.
I suppose if you got a gravel playground, it's probably not a good idea to be throwing snowballs.
No, that's a good point, because I think it's funny when we put safety mechanisms in place, sometimes it actually opens up a new area of injury.
Now you're targeting the face.
Football, like
helmets,
concussion. The helmets
Yeah.
made concussions go crazy in football. Rugby's been going on for a long time, once the pads are on, it becomes almost a different situation.
Yes,
and
moral
injury,
hazard.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was building Ambrose, we had to put in a play set, and the play set rep that came in had all his catalogs and wares with him, and I said, the kids want swing sets. He goes, oh, you don't want swing sets. Why don't you want swing sets? Oh, the fall weight, all these various safety parameters you had to put around swing set. So, of course, I thought, okay, no swing sets. And then my daughter went, oh. So it was like, okay, we'll put swing sets in. And, of course, those kids learned that when you fly off of a high swing set at the top of the arc, you sometimes eat your teeth.
It's a
when you
lesson in
land.
physics.
There's all kinds of mathematics that can be.
Usually they survived it. So
I would argue get good insurance. Talk to the parents about it and let them, because I think this does matter. We want to raise kids who are good risk takers, and we want to stop them when they're taking bad risks.
Well, and a lot of times grammar school teachers are women, and and I don't want to pick on women, but a lot of the women did not like tackle football at the school. Now, the snowball fights they'd go along with, other things, but tackle football they did not like. And it is one of those things that you can get hurt at. But the nice thing about it is second, third grade boys weigh what? 60 pounds, 50 pounds. The most they damage they usually do is they might fracture something. And they learn a lot.
Boys absolutely need to learn that if you take the other guy down hard on Tuesday,
You might get your sneak attack.
there might be some backsies on Thursday, right? You're calibrating your relationships, and
really
boys do this very physically.
That's right.
Right.
That's
It's
right.
so true.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I-
that is a vital point, is not just physical learning, but social learning
It's
for boys.
social learning for boys.
That's so
That's
good.
key.
And it may be that's a lesson even where maybe a little bit more of a slight boy or a boy that's a little timid, he kind of might need to step up and actually go at the guy that took him down. That's a good lesson.
And it crosses over into where the culture's bled into our schools, because bullying became a word that the left redefined into anything that made me feel uncomfortable.
That's right.
It didn't have to mean that you said, meet me out behind the playground after school. I'm going to be, it was anything that made me feel uncomfortable. So that's made its way into our schools. And I literally have, in multiple cases, had something like this happen, where moms come and say their child's being bullied, and it turns out they were being corrected by another student for cutting in line.
Right.
Not punched, not hit. Just say,
Told.
The back of the line's back there.
Yeah.
Buddy.
And buddy.
Right.
And that's bullying now, because it made them feel uncomfortable. And that's not hyperbole. I've heard that. Yeah. I've also seen it with regard to any criticism of someone's ability to do something. Oh, he can't do it. No, let's not have him be the quarterback. He can't ever throw the ball. Let's get John to be the quarterback. You can be a blocker or a receiver or something. That kind of thing is now called bullying.
That's a good
and
point.
so it's turned on end what bullying really is, which is malintent by someone who wants to dominate the other person for the sake of domination. That's a better way of viewing bullying.
Well, and I think as schools think through this, it's like look at what you're doing. Give. One of the things I think is important is free time is always going to be sin time. Oftentimes, it's when the teachers are the least engaged, and I actually would say playtime is when the teachers need to be the most engaged with training, because that's the time that you can really do formative training in those moments. A snowball fight's a perfect example.
I was just reviewing the manuscript of my book that's coming out this year, and it has a story in there of how a lot of schools give teachers their prep period during recess, or give them recess off. Yeah. That's the worst thing you can do.
That's right.
Have those teachers, and it shouldn't be if you have a really well-trained aide or parent, maybe they can do it, but for the most part, the teacher's cultivating virtue on the playground. It's the most important time to be on the playground. That doesn't mean don't give them a break. You can do music class or something else that takes them into a different part.
Time
but recess needs to be with the soul shapers, the teachers.
Matters. Well, and as we're talking about male and female, I'm going to go to the next one of what are adolescent girls made of? Leadership roles in our high schools, and are there excessive patterns in our school that might create, anti-feminism or anti-masculine. Yeah. What's going on in our schools that we maybe need to change? And so, one question to lead this off is: should a girl be a house president? Let's say you have a senior. Should a girl be a house president? So, Devin, I'll maybe start with you. What do you think on that?
Oh boy. Girls can certainly be house presidents. They actually probably would be very effective in some ways, which is why they probably ought not to do it. So,
okay.
because boys need a chance to step into those places, and there is a reality to the feminization of our young boys right now. I mean, this is not just out of some sort of kind of conservative response to things. Leonard Sachs, in his book Boys Adrift, documents lots of different longitudinal studies and examples to show that boys just are not stepping up to the kind of leadership positions that they ought to.
But does that mean you tell girls stand back so that the boys
It's a great question. No. Okay. I think, but if I had to choose, so yes, ideally you find ways where girls can exercise a kind of feminine virtue in their own kind of leadership qualities. But I think if I had to choose, I feel like the pendulum is in a different place right now, and we need to bring it back to encourage boys to step into those roles.
I think one of the things progressives do when they're trying to answer a question is they look to do some research, test and try things, and then research and see whether it worked or not. In the classical Christian world, we've always had the opposite response. If we wonder how to do something well, go back in history and see how it was done before when we didn't have these problems with leaderships and boys, right? I mean, if you look right now, I would say this is one of the crises of our age, in the sense that online, you can see what young men have become. They get radicalized into the most bizarre things because they're just desperate to be meaningful, and they're trying to drive at things. And so you got everything from anti-Semitism to sort of this crazy masculinity that's out there with what are some of those guys that drive the fast cars and get all the kids, all the young men into this. That whole kind of masculine image is just
the manosphere.
The manosphere
that's a good,
is the reflection of a society that forgot how to educate boys. So let's go back and look and see how they used to do it, which was single sex, which I think brings us to the next question, which is about single sex education.
Well, before we go there, I do want to say, I mean, I think we need strong boys, but I think girls make great house presidents, and they're organized, and they're responsible, and they're nurturing, and they often do a better job. And one of the things that is most grating on teenagers especially is when something bad is called good, or when something good is forestalled in favor of this like larger principle that's poorly executed, right? So if everyone knows that Deborah is the real house president because everything that happens in this house is something that she organizes, but Jake is the nominal house president because we have put a boy in that role, that's doing nobody any favors, including Jake. We need to find, as you were saying, a way of lifting up, because boys are developmentally, they're trailing in these years, and that's biology. It's not a failure of society.
Right.
But we are encouraging them, and a little bit of competition is good. How much competition with girls, I mean, I think that's where you're going with this next question, is a crucial question.
Well, and I think it does get down to, we don't want to hold the girls back to help the boys. We want to push those boys forward in every way we can, which does go into the next question. And I'm going to use a quote from C.S. Lewis from Silverchair.
Yes.
It was coeducational, a school for both boys and girls, what used to be called a mixed school. Some said it was not nearly so mixed as the minds of the people who ran it. These people had the idea that boys and girls should be allowed to do what they liked. So, according to Lewis, co-ed
This is where
schools,
Eustace went to school,
yes,
right?
this is where Eustace went to school. Co-ed schools were a questionable idea.
Boy, so miserable that he almost deserved his name.
But I mean, C.S. Lewis is really bringing up that mixed schools are a bad idea. What do you?
I think he's asked. I think that's
ironically, he didn't have a very good experience in single-sex boys' schools.
Right.
Lewis didn't.
Lewis did not personally,
and
but
he's using Eustace as an example.
But he's showing that there's a divine ideal to a boys' school that might be better than what he encountered.
Yeah, that's a great point. And he wasn't the only one of his generation to have those experiences. There were a lot of young men, educated in the English system.
19th century again.
19th century,
we should remember that's the Enlightenment century.
Well, and for people
We're so
watching,
enlightened.
I think this is an interesting conversation because there's very few schools budget-wise that could separate male and female.
All in the same facility
today. But the question is, I think really ultimately, are we doing this right? I mean, we want to be, and let me read a couple of quotes from Dr. Sachs real quickly.
Go.
So the most consistent and impressive finding in the research on single-sex education is that boys in single-sex schools learn to love literature and foreign languages, while boys in co-ed schools usually don't. I mean, one more thing. Girls in single-sex environments take more risks in science, math, speak up more, boys become less aggressive and more academically engaged. This gets back a little bit to even the question of could girls be house presidents? If you had gender-separated schools,
they'd both be presidents.
Of course.
they'd both be. You'd have two presidents. So what do we do with this? I mean, are single-sex schools? Do we look at the data and say that's a better way to go?
Sometimes I would love to see a proliferation of classical Christian schools to the degree that most people had access to coeducational schools. Maybe it's one that has a mixed model. In some grades, it's segregated. In some grades, it's mixed. Boys' school, girls' school, maybe some boarding schools that are single sex as well. I think one of the lessons from my growing up is that different children need different things, and that's not always possible, but it's important to recognize that there should be more than one model.
Agreed.
So my one disagreement, I'm not a fan of boarding schools, but other than that, I would agree. I think boarding schools are a function of a time period that anyway, the consequence of taking kids away from their parents too young is a bad thing. Yeah. But a lot of our schools do sex segregate some classes or many classes in 7th and 8th grade. That's not uncommon. I think the question is, have we taken enough effort yet to see what it would take to do it in high school? So here would be a thought experiment, for example. Ambrose, I hate to keep talking about it, it's the school I know the most, is big enough that it has 8 houses. Could you take 4 of those and make them men's houses and 4 of them make them women's houses and then have they do have sister houses already, have a sister and a brother house so that they competed in different ways in line with each other? Could you segregate some of those classes in the secondary, if not all of them? Could you make sure that you didn't have co-ed teams like in soccer or things like that? There are moderate steps you can take here. I think the caution is the danger we have in even suggesting it. And Leonard Sachs is interesting because he's works in the secular world and writes for the secular world, but he's kind of a little bit on the outside the Overton window, as you referred to it, because feminism doesn't let us talk about these things.
No.
And what we
Boys
need
and
to
girls
do,
are the same.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
and what we have to do in the classical movement is shed feminism. Get rid of that and look at what they did in the past. That was my point before. Okay, so single-sex schools were the norm up until 100 years ago.
I think that's a really good point. That Lewis, back to his quote, he calls this school that Jill Pole and Eustace go to experiment house, right? That's all we've known is experiment house.
Right.
It's maybe time to go back and discover what were the things that were possible when we did do this single-sex educational kind of community.
As Lewis also said, when you've lost your way, the most progressive thing you can do is go back.
Go back. Well, one of the things I think schools could practically do, I think, in some may not budget-wise or size-wise be able to do as much segregation as maybe this data would say is good. But the idea would be you could do unique situations where you do a week where only the girls come to school. And then you do a week where only the boys come to school, and just literally do an opposite break. That'd be hard on families. I'm just there's ways of thinking about it, but I think the intentionality of training even in the young years girls differently than boys, training them differently for the roles that God has created them for, and getting rid of feminism and trading that for real femininity,
right?
And real masculinity, because I think we've gone so crazy hyperbolic both directions to try to prove a point.
What I'm trying to encourage is get rid of feminism, and then imagine what could be done today. Yeah. Another thing that Lewis often talks about is we don't do this so that we can go back to the way the medievals were. Right. We do this to take inspiration from what they taught us. And so all these suggestions that we've come up with here, very few schools are trying them because they resist what the parents might say.
Think about it.
You're
right. Yeah. It's progressivism.
We need to be free to experiment with these things. Personally, I think you could get away with a co-ed school that had single-sex everything inside the context of the envelope because families want to go to the same school. I always noticed when I was, even if you had to have one kid go to a different school for academic reasons or something, it just never worked for the family.
This is the consequence of the automobile, right?
Yep, exactly.
So we can't quite go back.
Right, and you don't need boarding schools because we don't have to board a kid a long way away in order to educate them. But you also, because of automobiles, you don't want to drive all over the county just to drop off your kids at school. So if we could find within that envelope, how do we take kids in our current schools and find ways to make the men. That's what I was talking about, dividing the houses up and having sister. I mean, you could do it with as few as 4 houses, right? That's tough because you don't have enough competition. You don't want to put boys and girls into direct competition with each other. That fights the system. So you'd have to maybe have at least 6 houses so that you could have a round, 3 houses of boys and 3 houses of girls to play. You could go through all the iterations, but we should be imagining that kind of stuff.
I agree.
Well, a couple of the things that Dr. Sachs says is in a single-sex school for boys, you can create an environment where it's cool to be smart. In most co-ed schools today, the culture is dominated by girls' social concerns and boys disengage. He also cites data showing boys in single-sex schools have higher GPAs, higher college attendance rates, and far lower rates of behavioral referrals. I think that the stigma and the drama that goes on in co-ed schools could be offset by even moments where they're even separated for times where the girls can be girls, the boys can be boys. There's not the pressure, the social pressure of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And then another thing he says in Girls on the Edge, for adolescent girls, single-sex schools dramatically reduce sexualized peer pressure and eating disorders while boosting leadership and STEM participation. One thing I'd want to say there is we want these kids, their identity to be in Christ. First and foremost, in Christ, as a woman in Christ, as a man in Christ. What is their identity? And I think any place that you can find areas where you can separate that and really focus on, as a woman, what is your identity in Christ? As a man, what is your identity in Christ? And really, not that it's not the same, identified in Christ, but it's like God created you intentionally with different attributes.
They're not the same.
You're not the same, equal in value, different in roles. I think
There's
it's huge.
Probably an overlapping category here, right? There are human virtues, there are masculine virtues, there are feminine virtues.
Right.
I would be concerned about, I don't know, to take your example, right? If the automobile problem was solved and the left side of the campus was for girls and the right side was boys, for 18 years, I just would think, I don't know. We're meant to live in society. Our society is mixed, right? No one says, "Oh, it's better to have an all-boys family.
Right.
It's better to have an all-girls family," right? We're going to start selecting the genders of our children. That would be weird, right? And with interacting, we are also ending up with a lot of young people who struggle to relate well between the sexes.
That's true.
I think eliminating interaction is probably not the complete answer here, right?
Yeah, especially in a society where things are so confused. I mean, back in the day when you had male and female boarding houses, boarding schools, there were understood ways in which you got married eventually.
Well, and they did
were
participate with one another.
Right,
They did.
And even outside of that, marriage was a family thing. It's a different thing. So we do have to look at what the world we're in. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm with you.
I think teachers can be also trained in what to do in the classroom, especially in the younger years. You've got a lot of female teachers just because it's a more nurturing.
That's true.
But there's a way of doing, like, for example, if I have a boy that's struggling with penmanship, I instruct the teacher to have him do sit-ups before he writes. And it helps, it makes him feel a little bit better. He sits a little differently, and it actually is geared together. And that,
wow, what a
and
great.
I think if the teachers start to not be afraid of showing the differences. So if a girl and she goes, the one teacher I instructed in that, she said, "So what do I do if one of the girls says, 'Could I do sit-ups?' I say, 'You're in a skirt.'"
Yeah.
That wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say. Or we move furniture a lot in our classrooms, and I'll say, "Gentlemen, you get even with the little ones, you get the tables, and the girls get the chairs." And the girl will be like, "I'm just this chair." No, but we want these young men to be gentlemen. So we're going to let them carry the heavier thing. I'm not disputing at 5 years old. They are probably, the girls might be stronger, right? It's a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking for here, are using the innovation and wonder that we can bring to the classroom to change. So, like, what you're describing is similar to what I was describing with the 4 houses of girls and 4 houses of boys. If you did it that way, you'd have 4 presidents that were girls and 4 presidents that were boys. But the boys would all be leading other boys, and the girls would all be leading other girls. That's their life situation. That's their life situation. Because the girls, when you lead a bunch of other girls, you have a very different dynamic than when you're leading a mixed group of boys and girls. Because the weird dynamics between, you got 2 house leaders, one's a boy, one's a girl, they've got interest in each other, there's all kinds of things that are different. So just breaking free of these ideas that we can't be different, in that case you have opportunities for 4 boys and 4 girls, but they're in their proper role.
Yeah,
I think that's going back to way things were previously organized in a much better way. I mean, it wasn't ever that boys were active and engaged in the world and women were not. There has always been work for both sexes, and it would maybe by class, there could be washing work or serving work, but then there were women who were the equivalent of house presidents, and they were often involved in the charity sector, right? They were founding ministries, they were engaged in their community, they were taking care of a lot of people and leading others as well.
And as you used Deborah as an example in one of your things a little earlier, there's always those one-offs, right? There's an occasional female who ends up leading men in some capacity.
Right.
But that isn't what's normal.
Right.
And so what we should have is a training that's normal.
Yeah.
The normative world has women leading women, men leading men.
You see this in the history of the church, right? I mean,
Right.
even though we don't always, recognize it, but we have great men and women of God, but we're coming out of different places, right? You have the monastery, you have the nuns, right? Those were different communities, and in both places you have these amazing,
Yes.
leaders that are changing the world,
Right.
but they're able to do that in their own respective kind of groups.
Well, don't you see that? I think you see that in who we're maybe supposed to lead.
Yeah.
There's a difference. You see that with pastors
Right, that's-
being men, and like there's an aspect of who we're supposed to lead. And well, this has been great. I'm sure this has brought a lot of conversations even to your schools. That's what the purpose of this is. Discuss this, think about ideas, and thank you for joining us on The Four.